I'm Charlie Kennedy. I'm the historian for the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, who now trade as the Healing Trust. What we're looking at today is how the National Federation got healers into NHS hospitals from 1959 onwards. So questions along the way, anybody even on Zoom can ask questions as we go along rather than come back at the end. So if that's all right for everybody. So I've got to give you a bit of background because there is interesting historical stuff. And sadly, I'll have to read some of it, but I don't intend to read all the stuff. We have to go back to the 1735 Witchcraft Act, which basically made it a crime for persons to claim any human being had magical powers or would be guilty of practicing witchcraft. And with that act, they abolished the hunting and execution of witches. Now, healing, we know, is not witchcraft, but it was considered unusual and therefore magical powers. Now, that was repealed, that law, in June 1951, which was just before the National Federation started. But it was replaced, of course, by the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which prohibited a person from claiming to be psychic, a medium, or having any other spiritual abilities. Thankfully, that was repealed in 2008. But meanwhile, people who were healers were thought to have magical powers. So it made healers having an awful lot of problems, and many healers were prosecuted. So it is one of these things. On the 5th of June 1954, the National Federation was started in Ilford, Essex, by John Bricknell, Gordon Turner, I've forgotten the other one's name, isn't that terrible? I know this off by heart. William Price and Fred Doyle. And they all met at John Bricknell's home in Goodmayes and actually formed the National Federation of Spiritual Healers. But that had been after 2 years of talks with Harry Edwards and with Barbara Nell, who was the editor and one of the founders of Psychic News. They all talked about the need for this because of the Archbishop's Commission into Divine Healing, which was announced in October 1952. And finally, the Archbishops actually had it formed in October 53. So everything takes a little time. But they were going to look at how the church and other people who did divine healing worked with the British Medical Association and the General Medical Council together to help heal people and get them better. So this whole commission went on for years. It really did. The doctors were asked in, let me get the exact date, because otherwise it was in the, January 54 was when the British Medical Association were written to by the archbishops, and they were asked to set up a commission, and they were told how many people they could have in it, and they could co-opt some. It took until 56 for that report from the British Medical Association to the Archbishop's Commission came out, and they found that they could not say that healing helped with anything, was their thing. Harry Edwards was one of the many healers, along with non-spiritual healers. So we had Dorothy Kerrin as well, and we had Brother Mandas and various others. But all their evidence that was produced, complete with total evidence, was dismissed by the British Medical Association, which was really not very helpful. But what actually happened was Harry wasn't accepting that. That report came out, and the newspapers everywhere, because Harry had been doing demonstrations since 1948, public demonstrations, and he had been doing big ones, and actually people were there. He would have 500 people, and he would heal people, and they were seen to be healed. And it wasn't things like broken legs, you know, it was all sorts of things, people that were paralysed, people who were blind, people who had hearing loss, they could hear and see afterwards. The doctors claimed, and a lot of people claimed, that they didn't last, those healings, but they did. There's reports of 12 years later, people who walked off the stage when Harry and the Burtons had healed them were still walking 12 plus years later. And so it did work, but of course, everybody wanted it hushed up. But Harry had been doing these demonstrations up and down the United Kingdom. When I was researching at the Harry Edwards, there are so many records of absolute healing. A lot of it was done absently and a lot was done physically. People queued up to see Harry and the Burtons, and they would come to these big exhibitions. The biggest one was September 1956 at the Royal Festival Hall. Harry had done one as well at the Royal Albert Hall and invited the Archbishop's permission to it, and some of them came, but still said it didn't work. So it was like unbelievable. But what happened was, the first meeting of the N.F.S.H was in Essex, and afterwards John Britnell, the founder, wrote to Harry and asked him, would he be president of the National Federation of Spiritual Healers? One of the funny stories that Gordon Turner tells is that when they were coming up with a name for the National Federation, they wanted to call it the British Association of Spiritual Healers. And Gordon Turner told John, that spells bash. We don't want that. So that's why national federations were very common in the 1950s. So they went with the National Federation because the initials were much better. So, and it's now in the 2000s, it was changed to the Healing Trust because of the association of spiritual was not necessarily like, it was too close to spiritualism. But the founders' thoughts on it were very much, we're not doing the healing, Spirit are doing it. It's coming from the spiritual world through us to the healing, the client, the patient, and therefore it is spiritual healing, and it's got nothing to do with the spiritualist churches. But at the beginning of the N.F.S.H, a lot of spiritualist churches and the associations that were formed joined, and at the first meeting there was over 500 members of the N.F.S.H recorded. And they went up to, slowly, they set up what Gordon Turner did was appeal to every county in the United Kingdom to set up their own healing association and then amalgamate and affiliate with the N.F.S.H. And individual healers that were quietly working at home were asked to join the N.F.S.H as one-off healers, and they would act like the British Medical Association to get healing into hospitals and to get it accepted. That was the whole thing, was to get it accepted so that healers could go into hospitals. It took a long time. It wasn't fast, but as Gordon Turner said, from the minute that he announced it at an AGM, it took 7 months, which if you think about it, that's a phenomenal amount of time to get accepted in hospitals. You're going to have to take that one out. Take that one out. Boo-boo. Never mind. I am the historian for the National Federation and therefore the Healing Trust, as well as a professional dowser and a few other things. I'm a clearance practitioner, trance medium, clairvoyant, clairaudient, all that stuff that healers are not allowed to do. So you have to keep that completely separate. But we did have the AGM, and Gordon Turner suggested that the National Federation, of which he was the public relations officer, right to every single, back then we had hospital authorities, and within the authorities were many hospitals. So they wrote to every hospital authority asking, would they allow healers in? If healers came in to lay their hands on people, only if the patients asked. So the patient had to ask for a healer, and most of the authorities started replying immediately. first of all, we had 10 come straight back, but were in Greater London, and there was 30 in Greater London at that point. 10 of them came back and said, yes, if patients ask for a healer, we will contact you and ask you to send a healer that's close by. And it went on through the 1960s. What happened that was very interesting was the British Medical Association at their AGM in Torquay got upset in 1960 and did not like this, individual doctors, and they decided that they were going to try and persuade the doctors in the hospitals to ban healers. And the national press went ballistic. And of course the psychic press did, which was Two Worlds and Psychic News. And there was headlines everywhere. So then Psychic News and Two Worlds decided that they would counter it by having a headline a week, which was like 150 hospitals open to healers and all this stuff in the early 1960s, and really bumping it up. And Harry went on a major tour of places that in the early 60s, he went to Manchester, he went to Birmingham, he went everywhere, doing these huge, and all the local newspapers were alerted, and all the national newspapers were alerted, the Daily Sketch, and papers like that, who all the journalists had been to see Harry, had photographed the results, spread it all over the newspapers, and this was going on around the whole of the United Kingdom. By then, the National Federation was getting healers in South Africa asking to join, in New Zealand, in Australia, in Canada, in the USA, Germany, France, Catholic countries where they were not allowed to practice were all joining the N.F.S.H. Holland joined. It was one of these things whereby suddenly healers were everywhere. They were practicing, they were fixing people. So most of these healers had full-time jobs. Of an evening, they would start healing at 6 or 7 o'clock and heal until 10 o'clock or until the last person left in their little sanctuaries, which could be a room in their home. And a lot of them were joining associations. Essex Healing Association is the first, in 1948, was started by John Britnell. And he had the first recorded person who was a N.F.S.H and an Essex healer, a lady called Jean Patterson. She was the first recorded healer in a hospital in Ilford. Her nephew went in with polio. And from August 1959, Jean was going in every day and giving him hands-on healing with permission from the doctor. And they were so impressed by what she was doing, they offered her to come in and give healing to as many people who wanted it. So she was actually allowed to go through the walls. If people had said they wanted healing because they'd heard about her, she was allowed to go to that ward and heal that person. She cured paralysis in a lady who hadn't walked for 3 years. She went and dealt with absolutely anything. She literally sometimes just sat there and talked to them and used absent healing, which is now called distant healing. But she would go home and sit and send the healing to them every night. She would actually go and lay hands on people and help them to feel better. And it was found that they got better so much quicker. The doctors were stunned when paralysed people could walk, but she wasn't actually touching them. Her hands were literally laid on them. And this was astounding to them. So they let her come in to the hospital regularly, and in the end she ended up working 1 day a week, going in, but she was still going in. Her nephew took 6 weeks to, after 6 weeks of administering to him daily, he was able to walk, and they would let him out of hospital for 6 hours at a time. And they were just stunned that polio could be healed that quickly. Paralysis, all sorts of things, but she was the first registered one. The SNU, which is the Spiritualist National Union, they were teaching healing within their churches. And if you were a minister like Harry Edwards, you could go into a hospital because the SNU ministers could. So if you were a minister and a healer, you could go into hospitals before the N.F.S.H got in there. So that was perfectly happy. Harry had been with the Burtons a few times, invited into hospitals by doctors that were friends of his because they were stunned by the work he was doing. So it was very much that Harry and the Burtons, that's George and Olive Burton, were already going in on quite a few occasions. But Harry didn't count himself as the first NFSH healer because he was an SNU minister. So Jean Patterson was the first, and she went in. Then we had other people. When we got later on in time, we had George Pastor, who was called up by the hospitals, and he started going into Bournemouth and Portsmouth hospitals. He lived in Bournemouth. He went to the Bournemouth hospital. The Bournemouth hospital, actually, I'll tell you, had a very amusing situation. They very early on, before anything, said what they said at the Bournemouth hospital was that at this hospital they gave every person who came into the hospital a letter saying, we are going to look after your physical body, your mental health and your spiritual health. You can ask us and you will expect all our staff to help you with that. And they were asking the priests, vicars, different religions to come in and pray in their hospital, and it was part of the letter given to each inpatient who came into the hospital. So Bournemouth were way ahead. It was about 1954 that they were doing that. And other hospitals caught on. So when the N.F.S.H came up with, we would like to come and help you, because that's where the sick people are, it was much easier to go to the hospital authorities, get permission, and then it was a question of getting the people to know that healing was available and that you would be invited in by the doctor in charge. When they got permission by 276 hospital authorities, which was over 1,700 hospitals, which was 2/3 of the hospitals in the United Kingdom, they got permission to go in. Harry and Gordon Turner worked on 18 points. Actually, they did a whole document that every healer that was invited to go to hospital had to adhere to of the rules of doing hospital healing. And it applied right up until we went into the EBC. So it was like still in action, and every healer was given it, part of their joining the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, because the N.F.S.H was the first organisation outside of the SNU to get into hospitals, which was amazing. And it was done by sheer hard work. And I would have to say that Dorothy Comerford, who was Harry's sister, and she was the secretary of the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, did an awful lot of organisation. The woman was just unbelievable. She was living at Shire and running the office from 1958. John Britnell sadly died in 1957. He had a heart attack. He had been basically invalided out of the General Post Office, where he had run first aid. He got first aid into all of the General Post Office because in the Second World War, he was a conscientious objector, and he went into the medical corps and worked doing first aid in all the areas around Essex. And he was working for the General Post Office afterwards and brought first aid training in, which was long before St John's Ambulance were doing anything. And he was teaching that to anybody who wanted to do it. He got a British Empire medal when Queen Elizabeth took to the throne. It was actually a medal that was coming from her father. So in 1952, just as she ascended the throne, he got the British Empire medal for bringing in first aid to the post offices. He then got a whole load of other medals, all from the government and that, and he therefore was the right person to stop it. But it was like, and he was very humble. He didn't tell anybody about it. He hid it. It was like, no. But he died Christmas of 1957. No, that's wrong. It's 56, Charlie. And he then, the head office was run from his home, and Harry offered then to move it to Shire because it was easier for Harry as president. And his sister took over as secretary and took over from the lady that had been doing it up until then. So it was with great relief that the lady who was John's assistant said, yes, Mari Peacock. She was very shy, very quiet. She did not want to be in the public eye, very like John. And they were delighted when Harry said that he would take over the HQ of the N.F.S.H and they'd move it all to Shire. And so from actually August 1958, the N.F.S.H was run from Shire. Otherwise, it was in good name from Ilford. Anybody here from Ilford? No, sadly, that's a pity, because that's where it started. And it was really, really exciting for everybody. There was so much going on. When Harry said that when they got the paperwork from Mari, it was in so much confusion because John had been so very, very ill. And they had to, his sister had to spend hours. I mean, it's the usual thing, isn't it? When you take on something new from someone else, you've got to sort it all out. But John was actually very, very good. Gordon Turner said about him, John was very good at local levels, but he really found it difficult to address and go out and get on TV. Harry took to it like a breeze. I mean, you know, John, on the other hand, no, didn't want it, didn't like it. Gordon Turner first went on TV in 1960 on the ITV this week and had a discussion with doctors about getting healers into hospitals, but they'd already been accepted. And the doctor was saying, well, the thing is, and the BM, the British Medical Association, the thing is, what are they doing in hospital if they want to see a healer? And Gordon was saying, well, they can come and see us first, but we refer them to you. Because we're healing, yes, but if they need to see a doctor, they have to go to a doctor first. We would like to work with you in complementary to you so that we can give healing after surgery, so that it will heal quicker, so that things will be better like that. We want to complement you. We don't want to steal your jobs. If they need a doctor, if they've had a heart attack, they need a doctor. This is what they need. And then we can come in and help the wounds heal. We can give them peace, calm them down. Most of healing back then was the same as it is now, same as is taught at the Healing Trust. Getting somebody calm, talking to them gently, meditating with them, maybe teaching them to meditate, if that's what they need. Talking about what they're worried about, not offering advice, listening to what they've got to say and hearing them, and then sending absent healing if that's what they want, or actually doing the laying on of hands. We're now at the Healing Trust. We have wonderful training. An awful lot of people have joined the N.F.S.H and the Healing Trust, because it's now the Healing Trust, and they do the training, and then they set up their own little sanctuaries at home or do healing at home. We don't have the county associations anymore. That was all stopped in 1976, 77, which is when the N.F.S.H changed to regions. It was something that was discussed with Harry, because Yorkshire is a very large area. And it was too big, it's too vast. So they needed to actually have regions and split Yorkshire. And they had to then change it to regions because a lot of people were getting very confused. And the counties get changed basically by councils now, but they were changed actually by the Church of England. So you could be living in Bedfordshire and your village could be moved basically to Hertfordshire. And so it all got very confusing for people, which is why the county associations and having our old regions were changed. We had to move with the times, and it was Harry who started saying in the late 60s, this is becoming a problem. Mrs. So-and-so says she's in Yorkshire and she's now been moved. She's not happy. And she doesn't want to join them over there. So it was actually quite amusing that a lot of the healers were used to ringing Harry up and saying, I'm not happy. and we got thousands of letters from the different healers, not just the general public, asking for Harry's help and asking for everything else. It was like, wow, Dorothy was saying, what are we going to do? And it was then they started, the conversation over changing started in 65, when Gordon Turner, our stalwart, stood up and said, look, we've got to sort out the areas. We've got small areas, we've got big ones. We need to make it more fair. We can't have people travelling 40 miles to go to a healing centre. We need to do something. So that's when regions came in and they split things up. And they then started in the 70s. Roy Broadbent started in Bromley. He opened the first ever centre where healers could actually come in, that was a N.F.S.H centre, and actually do healings. Now we've got centres everywhere, and it's not just the National Federation, it's all the little associations that didn't move over when things changed. So I've got my own association. I've got friends that run them. We've got, of course, JASH, and we've got lots of organisations that now belong to the British Alliance of Healers Association, because they're the associations. Come 76, when it was announced that the National Federation was not going to have associations anymore, it would just be for individual healers. It caused mayhem. Essex healers immediately left. So the guys that started it left first. We're not doing that. No. And so it then became an organisation for individual healers and not associations. So the British Alliance of Healing Associations was set up immediately for the associations that didn't want every healer to join the N.F.S.H. So it was quite interesting how that happened, and all the internet, all the toing and froing and the arguments. Can you imagine? It was like, dreadful place. I actually, going through all the records down at Sheer, I was feeling ever so sorry for the people at Sheer. And this was when Harry was still alive. You know, he was still alive, and he was like, no, it's difficult to run the associations. And the associations, the problem was 2 people could represent each association on the council, which made it vast. And Gordon Turner says in his book, if he had known the length of some of the meetings, he would have stayed with the British Association of Spiritual Healers, because he said, I got an ear bashing every time. I was chairman and I was getting an ear bashing. Yorkshire wouldn't speak to Lancashire. This one didn't like that one. It was unbelievable. It would have been the right name. But, you know, that would have just been silly, wouldn't it? So it was like, you know, at the end of the day, anybody who's been healing for a long time, I joined in 84. It's the N.F.S.H. We just refer to it as the N.F.S.H, the N.F.S.H. Still do it. It's the Healing Trust, but it's to most of us that have been working there for a long time, it's still the N.F.S.H. and it's the N.F.S.H. And we all talk like the N.F.S.H. and it's like, oh dear, it's the Healing Trust. So it does add to the fun and games of it. But we had lots of people going on TV. Harry was always on TV. Harry just stick a camera in front of him and he was a showman. But he was equally a Gemini, you know, so he had got the wherewithal. And he was so humble. His attitude was, I am not the healer. I am just the vessel that the healing comes through. And he kept saying to people, remember, you are a human being that spirit are working through. So Harry wouldn't have liked losing the spiritual bit, because as far as he was concerned, it is spiritual healing. What we're teaching you is to attune to spirit, to let the healing through, and forget about what you're doing at home, and forget about your job. Gordon Turner was a journalist, which is why he was so good at doing so many things. And he would be writing the press releases and everything and getting them in. But Harry knew so many journalists, and everybody at the BBC and ITV knew Harry. Harry was everywhere. He was spreading the word. He was letting it flow. And he was just, let's go. And he would just ring up Barbanel and say, this is what's happened now. This is how many have accepted healers, and so that would be the next headline. And if you think back then, Psychic News now is a magazine that comes out once a month. It was a weekly publication with 8 to 12 pages every single week. Harry first appeared in there in about 1937. That's when his first article came in, and he had a headline that said, you know, the headline was, he healed somebody without them knowing it, and the blind person could see. And that was him on a stage, seeing people, but the person he healed was at the back of the room. As he was healing others, a blind person was able to see and didn't know what he was doing, didn't know he was healing that person. He was with these people. He always wanted to see the ones that, you know, arthritis and rheumatism was a specialty of his. Olive Burton's specialty was eyes and ears. George Burton could do almost anything, but there's no doubt about it, Olive Burton, she could cure blindness, she could get rid of, you know, we all get a cataract, she could dissolve them. It's phenomenal. And all she was doing was actually putting her hands just in front of their eyes, not even touching them. And she could do healing, where people, one man who sat, it was a big room, it was a big church hall, and this man was sitting at the back, and Olive was sending absent healing to him because he didn't want to walk forward. And his hearing, they asked him, he said he could see her mouth move, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. By the time she'd finished, 20 minutes later, he could hear everything in the room. And it was like, how did she do that? You know, how? She's up there and she's directing her hands towards it. How did that happen? You know, it's like people were astounded. But many healers were doing this. Gordon Turner in 1956 decided to actually leaflet the whole of Greater London. And he would do an area, and then 2 weeks later, he would do a demonstration. Brixton Town Hall was so full, people were queuing down to the train station. I don't know if the tube was there, but the train station to get into Brixton Town Hall for Gordon Turner and his associates, Mr. and Mrs. Prince. And that's what it was like. But they leafleted every single street in every part of London. And they would do an area, Lewisham, 2 weeks later, Lewisham Town Hall, Brixton. And they went round. It took them 2 years to do the whole lot. And they introduced spiritual healing to thousands of people. Gordon did then say, I was thinking of doing the whole country, but after 2 years, I was exhausted. And I couldn't do anymore. I was absolutely wrecked. It was like unbelievable. But he had all the local healing associations bringing their healers along because they couldn't believe how many people were queuing up to be healed. And like Harry, they decided if there's somebody who wants healing, we'll stay until they're healed. Which was, I mean, imagine that now. Harry sometimes got in a car, because he couldn't drive, he never learned to drive. He would get in a car to be driven home at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he got to get up the next morning and see people in his own healing sanctuary. It's like, wow. I mean, Gordon Turner said that some of the things that he didn't believe, but he got everybody walking the streets with these leaflets. One of his funny stories was Brixton, which is where I live. He said he was walking around the big flats, and they've all got walkways in the front of them, beautiful buildings. And he offered this lady a leaflet, and which sadly he'd done on blue paper. And she's, oh, sorry, my darling, we can only have red in here. We're Labour. We're Labour. That's Conservative. And he said, no, it's about healing. And she's, oh. Not sure about that, love. It's the wrong colour. and you know, he roared with laughter about it afterwards. He was like, why didn't I think of that? You know, You know, and it was just, it's those sort of things that they picked up so much information of how to do these things in future. If you're going to go and do Birmingham or Manchester, don't print anything on red or blue. Keep it away from the political colours, which is quite interesting. But the Minister of Health in 1960 was, let me just check his name, because he's Derek, definitely. And the thing is that I keep forgetting his name, which is terrible for me. So that's why I brought all these lovely bits of paper. Because there was this huge problem of the British Medical Association, bless them. I'm sorry to the people that see me look down to look for Derek's name, but I am absolutely useless at remembering people's names. No, I know that one. I've got lots of fun things here, but no, that's too much related to. Oh dear, Camilla, do you remember what I told you his name was? No, I'm sorry, forgotten it. All my highlighting didn't work. I'll look for it over tea and tell you what his name was. And that was the Conservative Party. But later on, when we got to the 70s and the Labour Party came in, again, the Minister for Health, Harry, wrote to the Minister of Health and said, can healers go into hospital? This was in 1960, and it was brought up. And the Minister of Health said, as far as I am concerned, he said, you talk to the hospital authorities. If they give permission, that's it. It is not for the Ministry of Health. It is not for the government. Later on, when the Labour Party came in, Harry wrote to them and got the same reply back. It is up to the doctors in charge of the person who wants healing. It is the hospital authorities, always. That's where you get your permission from. So it was actually much simpler. When we got to the 1980s, and we entered the European Economic Community, the good old EEC, which changed into the EU. Of course, over in Europe, healing is not allowed because mainly the Catholic Church do not allow it. So you have countries which have it. So it was illegal in France, it was illegal in quite a lot of countries to do spiritual healing because only priests could do it. So the EEC, one of the chair people, who is sadly no longer with us, he died just before COVID, which is, we will get his name, because Guy Batham was chair of the National Federation from 1985 to 1994. 9 years he worked hard. He was working with government. He was often in the Houses of Commons, meeting as the member for the National Federation and other organisations. He was the CHO and everything, and they were all working together to get healing accepted so healers can continue working in the United Kingdom when we entered the EEC, because it would have been illegal and all healers would have to stop or get qualified as doctors. One of the ideas of the EEC was that all healers would have to qualify as a doctor and then they could do healing. Imagine that, you know. And this was where guys started working on, okay, what we need to do for all healers is a training that is accepted to NVQ standards. And so there was lots of organisations working together, all coming together, BAHA and all these other organisations, to get a nationalised training system set up, which is where it started with eventually going to panel. So you did your 2 years training to get your NVQ, then you would go to panel, which is most of us who've ever been to a panel or know is such fun. You've got 3 people who are sitting there asking you lots of exciting questions about the human body and all sorts of things. You have to give a demonstration of healing. You know, luckily, I mean, some people during COVID had to do it on blow-up dummies because, you know, we had all the restrictions. So you had a plastic dummy and your 3 panel members were behind something else, and you were all masked up and everything, and you would do the actual practice on a dummy. You know, it's quite weird to watch, I have to say, having been on a panel then, and there we all are in full gear, you know, and there are these poor people who've done this 2 years training. We're asking them all these questions and we're, you know, trying to catch them out. That's the plan, is to catch them out. Do they actually know how many bones there are? And
why is that relevant?
It isn't really, but it's what we needed to do. But it is very funny how all of this anatomy is good. Harry did once say, one of his funny things to say was, he says, I love it when I hear people say, I think you've got something wrong with your liver, and they've got their hand near the kidneys. And Harry says, I hate it. John was equally the same. We need to teach them anatomy and physiology. And John wrote the first anatomy and physiology course that was available at NHS Healers in 1953. And it was the first course that all healers were recommended to take, so that they did just know where the liver was, where the kidneys were, where's your pancreas, you know. It's quite important. If you're telling somebody that they've got pain and you're telling them it's a different part of their body. So it was John Britnell that wrote the first ever, he'd been doing, you know, first aid everywhere, and it was like his bag. And anybody was allowed to do it, but it went on with the training. Harry Edwards took Gordon Turner on holiday in 1965. They went to the south of France, and Harry didn't like flying. He would do it. He preferred to go on a boat. He much preferred to go on a boat. And he took Gordon Turner, who was exhausted, down to the south of France, and they wrote the first healing course. They were there for a month, and they wrote the healing course, which was a correspondence course that was available from 1962. It was a correspondence course. Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary, have a copy of it. I spent 5 years looking for that. I found one in South Africa, but they said they had it, and when they checked, it had gone. Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary have found one, and I do have a copy of it. They very kindly sent me a copy of it for my research, and it is unbelievable. It is so much work, and so many healers immediately signed up to do it, and Harry marked every single one. So, and it was a long course. There was so many papers. It's about this thick, and it came out. And they also had an atlas. They paid, I can't remember the amount. It was in shillings and sixpences. So I mean, you know, I do remember shillings and sixpences, but it came out with an atlas of the human body. And I have a copy of one of those atlases at home. Sadly, I've got the gentleman's one. There's also a ladies' one. But I think they were sent out one that had both. But to get a copy from that era was actually quite difficult. And I will have photos of it in the book that I'm writing, because it is quite something to see. But it's this big. It's basically parchment, to be totally honest, and it's about this wide, and there's full body skeletons in beautiful colour. I mean, it is something else. All the sections of it are, but if you've got the man's one, it's in the man's body. And if you then need the ladies' one, and they didn't make it clear whether or not Balance Atlas, whether or not they were sending out the male one or the female one to each person. I think there was a little situation there, but it was enough for people to know what the bones were. I mean, you know, they weren't going into the details of, you know, which sex you are, you know, they didn't really, but it is quite explicit. And I was like, wow, this is quite something. And the trouble with it is it's so long, you can't take a good photo of it. And I was like, and to scan it, I was like, it doesn't fit on my scanner. It's too big. And I was like, I have to go to one of those big shops that can do this for me. But I think I'm a bit weird, you know. But I was like, hey, I am weird.
From medical practices of anatomy. Because I'm a doctor, so I obviously say that. And is it different? I'm trying to work out what.
Well, you'd have to go back to 1961 was when they were produced. I mean, I've looked through it. It's very good.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. It's better drawings than I've seen in any other book recently. Much better. And the way it's been coloured, because it's in colour, is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it is something, if you come again, and I'm here, because I'm going to come to this, I could bring it and show you. But I mean, they are both of them beginning to fall.
I've got that. It's actually my favourite book. I think they're fascinating.
Yes, I mean, these are just stunning.
Well, there's one called Bronze Atlas of Anatomy, which I think is quite old.
This one is Balians, Bailines. And literally, I found them on the internet. But they are stunning. The photography, just to actually have them is something else, because you're looking at something that's so brilliant and old and really should be kept in pristine. Mine is actually, the edges are all, it's like, do you remember blotting paper? Well, it's paper like that, and it is all sort of falling to pieces. But it's stunning. I meant to bring them today, and then I left them.
No, I'm quite agree with you. I just have one sitting at home.
Yeah, I mean, they are just beautiful.
They're readily available.
I think the first one I bought would have been in the 70s. Actually, it was in the 80s, because it's got Daley Thompson on the back. It's got Daley Thompson as the perfect man. But we're not here to talk about Daley Thompson. He was actually on TV last week. There was a documentary. It's just brilliant. I was like, yes, there's Daley. But yeah, I've got Daley on my first atlas for some reason. I don't know why. Might be why I bought it actually. It was because Daley Thompson was on the back. But no, we could meet up and I could show you mine.
Yeah, I'm just interested. They're different.
But they were very detailed. And just beautiful. I mean, it is a work of art.
Yeah, the same grant is similar. Details it's in colour and everything like that. So.
Beautiful colours. I mean, it's got blues as dark as these chairs. I mean, it is spectacular, and it's just such an interesting, long and thin. It's like you couldn't put it on your bookshelf because
it's just one, is it?
No, I've got two. I've got
one piece of one parchment.
It is parchment. There's lots of pages in it. You've got to turn it over. I mean, they had so many questions. You've got to answer all these questions, and you're not allowed to look at your atlas. That's what it says. And then Harry actually marked all of them, which was phenomenal. Because I was thinking, he's up all night. He doesn't go to bed till about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then he's up again. And he's writing letters, Harry. Well, he's not. He's recording them. He would record everything. For the typists, he had something like 24 typists replying to the letters of people who were sending letters to him. He was getting 10,000 letters a week. The post van would come and bring sacks there that were opened by his mum. Lived there for a little while. His mum and his sisters and that were opening all the letters and taking them out and seeing if they were personally for Harry or for a particular healer there, and sorting them all out, and which were for the N.F.S.H, which were Harry, which was this, which was that. And then the secretaries, Harry would sit in the afternoon and all through the evening, recording the things that needed to be typed the next day. And anything personal to Harry, all his personal letters and that, his sister typed. Every single one. And so when he went on a cruise, he would write in longhand every detail of what happened. So he would go to South America and South Africa, and he would write up everything that they did, every place that they spoke, what happened, who they met, everything. And then he'd post them to his sister, who would have typed them up by the time he got home. I mean, it was like, it's phenomenal. And an awful lot of that paperwork is still there. They've kept it, thankfully. A lot's gone missing, but, you know, I first went in their basement in 2016, and I finished just before COVID, where I went home to finish collating it all and getting it ready. And we took photocopies of things. They let us photocopy lots of things thankfully. And they basically, I couldn't believe how much they kept. And on cancer, there is vast amounts of information. Harry wrote his own cancer papers in the early 70s and did research into cancer himself. And the N.F.S.H did it as well, because they moved out of Sheer in 1970. They moved to 12 Gloucester Place in central London, which was the first, the only London headquarters for the National Federation. So it was 12 Gloucester Place. They took a lease on it, and they were only there for about 11 months before they found that the dilapidations on that property were going to be phenomenal, because it had got a few problems. And so they then moved back to Essex. They went back to where John started them. They went back to Essex, and from Essex they went to Sunbury-on-Thames. And from Sunbury-on-Thames they went up north. I'm going to say up north. Not as north as Watford Gap, I do know, but you know, up north. At the moment they're in Wellingborough, so it is quite phenomenal. But there was only the one place in London at 12 Gloucester Place, which is not far away, really. It's round the corner. And that was where then Gilbert Anderson and his wife Ruth they lived at the top of the building. And it then had a lounge for healers to come, it had offices, and it had healing rooms. Healers, NFSH healers were there every day, healing anybody who walked in off the street. They had lectures, talks, films, absolutely everything going on there. Gilbert and his wife worked. Gilbert was saying in his book, he said, we didn't stop. I mean, I was doing 24 hours a day to start with. He said, and then we got some time off. And he said, but others had to come in. And he said, and then things would happen, you know, the police would shut the street because there was a disturbance. And people couldn't get to us, and people were behind police barriers until they were allowed to come through because there was a problem in a building and all this sort of thing. And he was telling us some very funny stories about getting it ready. On the day of 14th of November was the opening day, 1970, of 12 Gloucester Place. It wasn't ready. And they were actually moving the builders out as the press people and Harry turned up to open the building. And they were like, you know, get that out. Ruth was saying, everything was a bit of a mess, but they opened it. The carpets weren't fitted that morning. And they had very little furniture, and they'd appealed to all the N.F.S.H members and said, you know, can you bring some chairs? So people were getting off buses with deck chairs and garden chairs in 1970, which must have been an absolute sight. But they had this big press opening, which was fantastic. And then within a very short time, they had to move again. And they went out of London and have never been back, which is very, very sad, really. They shouldn't have given up, but they were looking to buy, and they didn't manage it in London. It was far too expensive. They looked at something like 10 different properties. What happened with it was Olive Burton decided that Harry was getting too old to carry on like this, and this was in 1967. And she talked to Harry that you really should not be seeing this amount of people, and they were getting worried about his health. He was robustly healthy most of the time, but she was worried about it and running the N.F.S.H from Burroughsley, which is when they started from the AGM in 1967, looking for a new place, a new headquarters, so that the strain wasn't on Harry. So it took them until 1970. They found it in 69. And they started sorting it out, and it did need work doing in order to get it ready. And they opened it on Valentine's Day, 1970. And they had moved out by January 1971. So they weren't actually there very long. And I haven't found a record of exactly what the problems were with the building, that it was so important to get them out. There was very strange things that did go on in that building. It obviously had a ghost or two. You know, there was obviously, Gilbert has said, you know, To say that things that went bump in the night, he said, is an understatement. He said things that we would put in a certain place would be found 3 days later somewhere completely different. And there's lots of letters from him who say to Harry, do we know anybody that can actually come and do something about this? You know, it's one of those, it couldn't have been much fun, but all the time healers were going into hospitals and Harry was constantly writing to each government to check we still got permission to go in, and that every single time the letter came back from the minister saying nothing has changed since 1960. So long as you have the permission of the hospital authority and the doctor who is seeing that client, you are very welcome. So it's been a huge and wonderful thing. Now there's a lady who is still alive. I've been looking for people who have done work as a healer, an N.F.S.H healer in hospitals, who is actually still alive. Because obviously those that were alive in the early 1960s and were in their 30s, well, there weren't many of them in their 30s, the 40s, 50s and that, are not with us anymore. But there's a lady who's still alive, she's called Ruth Kay. She lives up in Leeds. Now Ruth trained with the N.F.S.H in 1984, and from 1991 she was working in hospitals in Leeds. Now, I've spoken to her quite a few times, so I actually have to read this. She started working in the Cookridge Cancer Hospital in 1991, and she worked there for 15 years until it closed down. And when it was closed down, the entire cancer hospital moved to the Bexley wing of St James's Hospital, Leeds, where she worked for another 30 years. She was an employed member of the National Health Service, and she originally volunteered to one of the consultants to help him with his patients. And he was a cancer consultant, and he asked her to voluntarily give healing to his clients. So this is in 1991, and she was working full-time for the NHS and giving healing voluntarily. When they moved, she got paid to give healing. And she did it for 30 years. And then she retired, and she's still giving healing, but she did send me lots of information. She said that she was working 30 years in healing within the NHS. During that time, she worked for the entire hospital in radiotherapy, ICU teenage wards, palliative care wards, and then she followed her patients through to hospice care in York, Harrogate, and Leeds. In 2006, Ruth had the honour of being in the Daily Mail. Don't we love the Daily Mail? It's a fabulous paper. And they did an article on her on the 3rd of October, saying that she's a healer at the Yorkshire Centre for Clinical Oncology in Leeds, and she's healing there. Her aim is to augment conventional medicine and to help eliminate the side effects of such treatments as chemotherapy. Now, Ruth used to say that the spirit is the missing link that medicine does not understand and does not address, but it is the key and the secret of life. And what she said to them was, one of my patients described my work as being one part of a three-legged stool. The medicine is one leg, the surgery is the second leg, and the spiritual healing is the third leg. Without the spiritual healing element, the stool would fall over. Now, the hospital patients having spiritual healing used fewer drugs, were less reliant on antidepressants and sleeping tablets, and therefore less of a drain on the overstretched N.H.S. And that was in 2006. One of her patients who successfully underwent treatment for breast cancer says she was helped enormously by Ruth. Ruth has a special gift, this lady said. I simply closed my eyes when she was healing me, and I saw loads of bright lights. It felt as if I was having my battery recharged. I wonder if we could charge our mobile phones up with our healing ability.
Can I speak? I don't know whether you can hear me.
She hadn't slept for days, but afterwards fell into a wonderful, relaxed sleep. She said, I don't know how it works, but I know it does. And she says, I don't need to understand how. But Ruth is still working as a healer. She's involved in the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Edinburgh, and she's working with the University of Northampton currently, experimenting to try and prove scientifically that absent healing can reach out within a controlled trial. She has been awarded this year the ribbon sculpture, which will be placed in Leeds City Centre for Inspirational Women later this year, and she's hoping to attend. But she is 89 years old and having trouble with walking. But people still come to her. Some of her patients that she healed all those years in Leeds come to her home to see her. She said they bring a dinner as well. K-A-Y-E. I don't know if you know this. Do you know the name Jonathan Craner, the astrologer?
No, yeah.
She's his mother. And Daniel, who was here earlier, dressed all in black, is her other son, who's a musician. So she had 3 sons. There's Daniel, Jonathan, and I've forgotten the third son's name, which is very sad. So yes, Daniel's helping me because he's going to bring me a lot of her research. She's got research on all of this stuff that the hospital gave her. She was seeing patients every day. She's got all the records of everything that she's going to give to me so that I can get it in order so that it doesn't disappear, because she says, I can't live that. You know, she is 89, but that's a 30-year career working in the National Health Service, actually being paid to be a healer. And there are quite a lot of healers that have been paid as well. We all know, I mean, at the end of the day, that many healers, so we do know that there are other ones that we've got. Of course, there's Angie Buxton King, who is running her own charity for cancer. She lost her son, and she's written a book. And we've also got Sandy Edwards. But there are other healers, not just N.F.S.H ones, that have actually been working with different doctors and different hospitals. And I'm aiming to get them all to send me information so that we can have a record as clear as possible. I've got quite a few. George Pastor was definitely doing it in the 70s in the hospitals down in Bournemouth and Poole, which is where I used to live at one point. And I actually remember seeing him years ago. I went to see him at his sanctuary in Bournemouth just to talk to him because I was like curious. And I just thought, I wonder if he could cure my type 1 diabetes. He'd take it away from me because I don't want to have it, you know. And I actually talked to him and he said, we could try, but you know, if the pancreas is actually that broken, guess what? And I said, well, Catherine Shepherd did it. Catherine Shepherd was a lady who was employed by Harry Edwards to be his PA when he was living in Newell before he moved to the sanctuary at Shire. And she was interviewed to be a secretary. She didn't know what he did or anything, but she typed letters for 3 years for him and learned through what she was typing what he did. She said he never, ever tried to convert me to be a healer or anything, but she studied healing, watching him, and she eventually became one of the better known healers as well. Catherine Shepherd went up and down. She started her own sanctuary. She trained other healers. She cured her own diabetes. She absolutely cured it. She was teaching people, but she started off as Harry's secretary, and she just thought, there's something good about this. I wonder if I can do it. And Harry used to back her and support her and say, he went and opened her sanctuary. And she was in the next village, and she was just fantastic. She helped lots of people with and a lot of the healers back then became good at certain things, certain unwellnesses. Now, as I said, Olive Burton did eyes and ears. Very good with children, with And many of the healers found that certain things, certain unwellnesses, they were really good at. And so it's kind of, Harry, of course, was absolutely brilliant with arthritis and rheumatism. But then Harry was brilliant at anything. I mean, you know, Harry, it's like, you know, how did that happen? But I mean, he said that it was Lister and Pasteur, two doctors that had passed over, who channeled the healing through him. He would not accept it was him. And a lot of the others said it's their guide, and they would give their guides names, or Harry just wanted to know who they really were. But he was told by, I think it was Estelle Roberts, that they were Lister. So at the end of the day, and a lot of people did want to know as a healer, what is working through me, and does it have a name? And that is something that is very common. People want to know what their guides are called and those working with them, which at the end of the day, as a healer, you want to keep that, you know, the fact that you can do the healing is one thing. And some people found, Harry used to say, some people get drained by doing the healing because they're not getting themselves out of the way and being a true channel. So you've got to actually leave your mind away. Don't worry about the washing up. Harry used to say to them, don't worry about the washing up. Don't worry about the letter that you got this morning. Don't worry about anything. Get yourself attuned and let them do the healing. And it doesn't matter where it's coming from, whether you think it's coming from Jesus or Jesus Christ, whether you think it's coming from God, wherever you think it's coming from, it does not matter. It is coming, and you will feel it as you go near people. They will feel the heat that is flowing through you, rather than knowing the name of whatever it is that's doing it. That is not important. You must be a pure channel for the healing to come through. And that's what it's all about. And he used to have arguments with people. He didn't like people waving their hands around people. And he got to clear auras or repair them with waving their hands around. He said, I don't want to see hands being waved around. He said, you should tune into to people, ask them if you can touch them. Harry used to hold their hands. He'd put his hand over theirs or take their hands like that. And we now, at the beginning in the training, we ask if we may touch on the shoulders to attune to the person. But you can touch their toes if you want, you know, so long as you can attune to the person is the most important thing. And then the healing starts to flow. But Harry was like, he did not like people waving their hands about. And he used to say things, and he said, I hate people who flip things away. He was getting so cross. And he would say, we don't need to flip things away. There's nothing to flick away. And all these passes, he called them passes. He said, it's not necessary. You can talk to the person and the healing will reach them. You don't need to do an elaborate, learn how to do something elaborate. It takes about 30 seconds to a minute for the healing to reach. And they'll take as much as they need at this point in time. And then we suggest they come back for some more, because there's only so much they can take at a time. And this is the most important thing. But Harry was, I mean, Matthew Manning says the same things as well. You know, Matthew is very well known. He's been scientifically tested, probably the most scientifically tested healer ever is Matthew. And he takes minutes. He doesn't. There are some funny stories of Matthew's that I haven't got his permission to tell, so I won't. But because if that would just, I haven't asked him, can I tell this funny story that you told us once? You know, because it's just like, but you do get funny things just happen. I once had a lady who came, her husband brought her, and I just sat on a chair in the room, and I sat on the sofa and talked to her. And he had to carry her up my stairs because she could not walk. And the wheelchair was downstairs, but I live in a masonette flat in Brixton, and they're very narrow stairs, and the wheelchair wouldn't even hit the front door. So, and he carried her upstairs and sat her on a chair. And I said, we can sit her on the sofa if you want. And he said, "No, I think the chair's better." And she sat there, and he went off to the cafe to have a cup of tea. And I said, "I'll text you when we finished." And off he went. So he went to my local cafe where I'd sort of said there might be a gentleman come, and just put it on my tab, you know. And they thought that was funny. I didn't have a tab, but there you go. Doesn't matter, does it? I knew them well. I only lived down the road. And I said, "Don't let him pay." I said, you know, and anyway, we called him. She sat there and I talked to her. I didn't do very much else. I just talked to her. And I let Spirit do what Spirit wanted to do. And after about 45 minutes, I said to her, I think they finished with everything. And she was telling about her life in Singapore and all this stuff. And what happened was, husband rang the doorbell. She got up off that chair and walked down the stairs and opened the front door to him, and he burst into tears. He said to me, "What have you done?" I said, "I didn't touch her. I sat opposite." I said, you know, basically, she's received spiritual healing. I said, she needs to take it gently. I didn't want her to walk down the stairs. And he was just stunned. But we don't know what happens, do we? I mean, some people call it miracles. So let's go to questions.
I just want to say, Annie Hallett has sent a message to me saying, "So pleased you've mentioned Ruth. I was going to say so, but here it is in the chat."
Yes, I can.
That's lovely. Now, I speak to Ruth regularly.
Can you hear me? It's Annie speaking here. Can you hear me?
She did have an awfully hard time.
We can hear you, Annie.
Thank you. I was just going to say,
can
you put me back on video, please?
But she's going to give me all the details so that I can write about her and explain how hard it was to keep working in healing in hospitals as different managements came and went. She said it was awful on many occasions. Anybody else got a question? Yes.
I'd just like to ask you, I have heard that the energy field is the template for the physical body. And some people can see the problem in the energy field before it gets to them. So do you think that healers are channeling this energy and it goes to the energy field?
They say the etheric body is perfect. So we've all got an etheric body, an astral body, and a physical body.
Yes.
The etheric body is perfect. So if you are unfortunate and you lose your leg,
Yes.
have a part of a limb removed,
Yes.
the etheric limb is still there.
Yes.
And it gives pain sometimes, even though, and it's still there. When you cross, I'll say cross the threshold of death,
Yes.
and you cross your etheric body, if you have lost a limb, when you cross, you are whole again.
Yes.
And now the energy field, what happens is it's perfect. And what goes on is a lot of unwellnesses do come from anxiety and stress. Harry used to keep saying the most of all unwellnesses come from stress and anxiety and all of this and having too busy a life. And that eventually will turn it into a symptom. And that's the part of your body that needs to be treated medically, looked at and treated correctly. So you go and have whatever done. I mean, you know, one of my brothers had to have a valve put in his heart. And I said to him afterwards, "I'll send you absent healing, but I don't want to give you hands-on healing, because I've been told by many people I'm too powerful. Not when you've had that." And I've done lots of people where what happens is if you've got a problem that needs to be operated on, it's got to be operated on. Doctors do what doctors are good at. That they fix things. If it is, a lot of people get anxious in that. So if they came for healing when they were anxious and stressed, it possibly wouldn't turn into an unwellness. But getting people to meditate And really, when they come, I don't know about you, people come and lie on my couch. They have an hour on my couch. They relax, possibly for the first time in a long time. And they are bliss. You know, I'm doing the healing act. They are basically relaxed. And they thank me because that's the best. And they feel so refreshed. Like Ruth's people were saying, recharge battery. It's probably the only hour that they have spent actually doing nothing, not thinking of anything, and relaxing. And so healing can actually prevent unwellnesses before they arrive. And you don't have to get ill. But look at the lives we live. We've got technology everywhere, all sorts of things going on. So, and if you've got, I mean, it is one of those things, you can't cure something by just healing. It can help. It helps people relax. It's amazing what energy can do. It can dissipate. Harry regularly got rid of, you know, what we used to call Dowager Duchess's humps. He just put his hands near them and they dissolved. But his hands were unbelievable. And lots of others do that. And it can be done, but you can't do it every time necessarily. It's not like, okay, we're going to give you some sleeping pills to get you back into a sleep pattern. But we want you to stop taking them after this period of time because it doesn't work for everyone. There's other things going on in people's bodies. So it isn't so easy. You can't say, I can cure this, that, and the other. But a physical body, the healing will go where it's needed to the root cause of problems. But you need doctors. You need today's modern medicines often. And, you know, friends had lung cancer and the chemotherapy and the radiotherapy and everything really helps. Now, to support it with healing, because it's unpleasant, the side effects are unpleasant. Some people get more sick with the whichever treatment they're having. The healing really helps and it helps relax. My stepmother had cancer and I would send her healing. And she used to say to me, I'm feeling bad today. And I was like, okay, just, she said, well, I'm lying in bed. She said, I don't mind when you send it. And it used to just be, you send it and they will receive it and it will help them. If it's to take away the intense pain and reduce it, that's comfort. And they can then relax and they hopefully feel better. Harry said it's getting people to relax is the biggest thing. And he could do that. And then he didn't know how they did it. I can't ask those that work through me, how do you do it? I get told on a need-to-know basis, you don't. And that's what I get told, and I roar with laughter. But it is one of those things. We don't know. But it is, and the energetic body just keeps working. I mean, I can say I've been diabetic type 1 for 55 years. And my diabetic consultant thinks I'm the best diabetic they've ever known.
Yes.
You know, he's just retired and gone to live across the channel, somewhere, in that bit in between where there's some islands. And he used to say to me, you know, Charlie, he said, you're the best diabetic I've got. And I was like, well, that's because I look after it. And I used to give myself healing as a healer. It's like, it's part of it. I truly believe that I don't take any other drugs other than my insulin.
Yes.
And I've been doing that since 1969. And I don't get unwell.
Yes.
So it's one of those things. But I think if you learn to meditate, when I'm teaching healers, I teach people to meditate, to relax, to be grounded and to be protected. Most importantly. Any other questions? Because it's nearly tea time. They've all gone quiet. That's good. I was expecting lots of questions. Over tea, you can ask me anything, because then I can find this, the Ministry of Health.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for
Thanks,
this
everyone.
informative, fascinating talk. Let's all give Charlie a hand. Thank you. And we hope to have the next meeting on the 7th of September. Speaker to be announced.
Okay.